His taste for the Western dance had much the same air of unreality about it. He had grown up in the merchants section of Tokyo, and he had been thoroughly familiar with the kabuki theater from his childhood. As a student, his interest had shifted to the Japanese dance and the dance drama. Never satisfied until he learned everything about his subject, he had taken to searching through old documents and visiting the heads of various dance schools, and presently he had made friends with rising figures in the dance world and was writing what one might call research pieces and critical essays. It was but natural, then, that he should come to feel a keen dissatisfaction with the slumbering old tradition as well as with reformers who sought only to please themselves. Just as he had arrived at the conclusion that there was nothing for it but to throw himself actively into the dance movement, and as he was being persuaded to do so by certain of the younger figures in the dance world, he abruptly switched to the Western dance. He stopped seeing the Japanese dance. He gathered pictures and descriptions of the Western ballet and began laboriously collecting programs and posters from abroad. This was more than simple fascination with the exotic and the unknown. The pleasure he found in his new hobby came, in fact, from his inability to see with his own eyes Occidentals in Occidental ballets. There was proof of this in his deliberate refusal to study the ballet as performed by Japanese. Nothing could be more comfortable than writing about the ballet from books. A ballet he had never seen was an art in another world. It was an unrivaled armchair reverie, a lyric from some paradise. He called his work research, but it was actually free, uncontrolled fantasy. He preferred not to savor the ballet in the flesh. Rather, he savored the phantasms of his own dancing imagination, called up by Western books and pictures. It was like being in love with someone he had never seen. But it was also true that Shimamura, with no real occupation, took some satisfaction from the fact that his occasional introductions to the Western dance put him on the edge of the literary world, even while he was laughing at himself and his work. It might be said that his knowledge was now for the first time in a very great while being put to use, since talk of the dance helped bring the woman nearer to him, and yet it was also possible that, hardly knowing it, he was treating the woman exactly as he treated the Western dance. He felt a little guilty, as though he had deceived her, when he saw how the frivolous words of the traveler who would be gone tomorrow seemed to have struck something deep and serious in the woman's life. But he went on. I can bring my family here, and we can all be friends. I understand that well enough, she smiled, her voice falling, and a touch of the geisha's playfulness came out. I'd like that much better. It lasts longer if you're just friends. You'll call someone then? Now? Now. But what can you say to a woman in broad daylight? At night, there's too much danger of getting the dregs no one else wants. You take this for a cheap hot spring town like any other. I should think you could tell just from looking at the place. Her tone was sober again, as though she felt thoroughly degraded. She repeated with the same emphasis as before that there were no girls here of the sort he wanted. When Shimamura expressed his doubts, she flared up, then retreated a step. It was up to the geisha whether she would stay the night or not. If she stayed without permission from her house, it was her own responsibility. If she had permission, the house took full responsibility, whatever happened. That was the difference. Full responsibility? if there should happen to be a child or some sort of disease. Shimamura smiled wryly at the foolishness of his question. In a mountain village, though, the arrangements between a geisha and her keeper might indeed still be so easygoing. Perhaps with the idler's bent for protective coloring, Shimamura had an instinctive feeling for the spirit of the places he visited, and he had felt as he came down from the mountains that, for all its air of bare frugality, there was something comfortable and easy about the village. He heard at the inn that it was indeed one of the more comfortable villages in this harsh snow country. Until the railway was put through, only very recently, it had served mainly as a medicinal spring for farmers in the area. The house that kept geisha would generally have a faded shop curtain that advertised it as a restaurant or a tea room, but a glance at the old-style sliding doors, their paper panels dark with age, made the passerby suspect that guests were few. The shop that sold candy or everyday sundries might have its one geisha, and the owner would have his small farm besides the shop and the geisha. Perhaps because she lived with the music teacher, there seemed to be no resentment at the fact that a woman not yet licensed as a geisha was now and then helping at parties. How many are there in all? How many geisha? 12 or 13, I suppose. Which one do you recommend? Shimamura stood up to ring for the maid. You won't mind if I leave now. I mind very much indeed. I can't stay. She spoke as if trying to shake off the humiliation. I'm going. It's all right. I don't mind. I'll come again. When the maid came in, however, she sat down as though nothing were amiss. The maid asked several times which geisha she should call, but the woman refused to mention a name. One look at the 17 or 18-year-old geisha who was presently led in, and Shimamura felt his need for a woman fall dully away. Her arms, with their underlying darkness, had not yet filled out, and something about her suggested an unformed, good-natured young girl. Shimamura, at pains not to show that his interest had left him, faced her dutifully, but he could not keep himself from looking less at her than at the new green on the mountains behind her. It seemed almost too much of an effort to talk. She was a mountain geisha through and through. He lapsed into a glum silence. No doubt thinking to be tactful and adroit, the woman stood up and left the room, and the conversation became still heavier. Even so, he managed to pass perhaps an hour with the geisha. Looking for a pretext to be rid of her, he remembered that he had money telegraphed from Tokyo. He had to go to the post office before it closed, he said, and the two of them left the room. But at the door of the inn he was seduced by the mountain, strong with the smell of new leaves. He started climbing roughly up it. He laughed on and on, not knowing himself what was funny. When he was pleasantly tired, he turned sharply around and, tucking the skirts of his kimono into his obi, ran headlong back down the slope. 2 yellow butterflies flew up at his feet. The butterflies, weaving in and out, climbed higher than the line of the border range, their yellow turning to white in the distance. What happened? The woman was standing in the shade of the cedar trees. You must have been very happy, the way you were laughing. I gave it up. Shimamura felt the same senseless laugh rising again. I gave it up. Oh? She turned and walked slowly into the grove. Shimamura followed in silence. It was a shrine grove. The woman sat down on a flat rock beside the moss-covered shrine dogs. It's always cool here. Even in the middle of the summer, there's a cool wind. Are all the geisha like that? They're all a little like her, I suppose. Some of the older ones are very attractive, if you had wanted one of them. Her eyes were on the ground, and she spoke coldly. The dusky green of the cedars seemed to reflect from her neck. Shimamura looked up at the cedar branches. It's all over. My strength left me. Really, it seems very funny. From behind the rock, the cedars threw up their trunks in perfectly straight lines, so high that he could see the tops only by arching his back. The dark needles blocked out the sky, and the stillness seemed to be singing quietly. The trunk against which Shimamura leaned was the oldest of all. For some reason, all the branches on the north side had withered, and their tips broken and fallen. They looked like stakes driven into the trunk with their sharp ends but to make a terrible weapon for some god. I made a mistake. I saw you as soon as I came down from the mountains, and I let myself think that all the geisha here were like you. He laughed. It occurred to him now that the thought of washing away in such short order the vigor of 7 days in the mountains had perhaps first come to him when he saw the cleanness of this woman. She gazed down at the river, distant in the afternoon sun. Shimamura was a little unsure of himself. I forgot, she suddenly remarked, with forced lightness. I brought your tobacco. I went back up to your room a little while ago and found that you had gone out. I wondered where you could be, and then I saw you running up the mountain for all you were worth. I watched from the window. You were very funny, but you forgot your tobacco. Here. She took the tobacco from her kimono sleeve and lighted a match for him. I wasn't very nice to that poor girl. But it's up to the guest, after all, when he wants to let the geisha go. Through the quiet, the sound of the rocky river came up to them with a rounded softness. Shadows were darkening in the mountain chasms on the other side of the valley, framed in the cedar branches. Unless she were as good as you, I'd feel cheated when I saw you afterwards. Don't talk to me about it. You're just unwilling to admit you lost, that's all. There was scorn in her voice, and yet an affection of quite a new sort flowed between them. As it became clear to Shimamura that he had from the start wanted only this woman, and that he had taken his usual roundabout way of saying so, he began to see himself as rather repulsive, and the woman as all the more beautiful. Something from that cool figure had swept through him after she called to him from under the cedars. The high, thin nose was a little lonely, a little sad, but the butt of her lips opened and closed smoothly, like a beautiful little circle of leeches. Excuse me. Even when she was silent, her lips seemed always to be moving. Had they had wrinkles or cracks, or had their color been less fresh, they would have struck one as unwholesome, but they were never anything but smooth and shining. The line of her eyelids neither... Oh my God, excuse me. The line of her eyelids neither rose nor fell, as if for some special reason it drew its way straight across her face. There was something faintly comical about the effect, but the short, thick hair of her eyebrows sloped gently down to enfold the line discreetly. There was nothing remarkable about the outlines of her round, slightly aquiline face, with her skin like white porcelain coated over a faint pink, and her throat still girlish, not yet filled out. The impression she gave was above all one of cleanness, not quite one of real beauty. Her breasts were rather full for a woman used to the high, binding obi of the geisha. The sand flies have come out, she said, standing up and brushing at the skirt of her kimono. Alone in the quiet, they could think of little to say. It was perhaps 10 o'clock that night. The woman called loudly to Shimamura from the hall, and a moment later she fell into his room as if someone had thrown her. She collapsed in front of the table. Flailing with a drunken arm at everything that happened to be on it, she poured herself a glass of water and drank in great gulps. She had gone out to meet some travelers down from the mountains that evening, men she had been friendly with during the skiing season the winter before. They had invited her to the inn, whereupon they had had a riotous party, complete with geisha, and had proceeded to get her drunk. Her head waved uncertainly, and she seemed prepared to talk on forever. Presently she remembered herself. I shouldn't be here. I'll come again. They'll be looking for me. I'll come again later. She staggered from the room. An hour or so later he heard uneven steps coming down the long hall. She was weaving from side to side, he could tell, running into a wall, stumbling to the floor. Shimamura, Shimamura, she called in a high voice. I can't see, Shimamura. It was, with no attempt at covering itself, the naked heart of a woman calling out to her man. Shimamura was startled. That high, piercing voice must surely be echoing all through the inn. He got up hastily. Pushing her fingers through the paper panel, the woman clutched at the frame of the door and fell heavily against him. You're here. Clinging to him, she sank to the floor. She leaned against him as she spoke. I'm not drunk. Who says I'm drunk? Ah, it hurts. It hurts. It's just that it hurts. I know exactly what I'm doing. Give me water. I want water. I mixed my drinks. That was my mistake. That's what goes to your head. It hurts. They had a bottle of cheap whiskey. How was I to know it was cheap? She rubbed her forehead with her fists. The sound of the rain outside was suddenly louder. Each time he relaxed his embrace even a little, she threatened to collapse. His arm was around her neck so tight that her hair was rumpled against his cheek. He thrust a hand inside the neck of her kimono. He added coaxing words, but she did not answer. She folded her arms like a bar over the breast he was asking for. What's the matter with you? She bit savagely at her arm, as though angered by its refusal to serve her. Damn you, damn you. Lazy, useless. What's the matter with you? Shimamura drew back startled. There were deep teeth marks on her arm. She no longer resisted, however. Giving herself up to his hands, she began writing something with the tip of her finger. She would tell him the people she liked, she said. After she had written the names of some 20 or 30 actors, she wrote Shimamura, Shimamura over and over again. The delicious swelling under Shimamura's hand grew warmer. Everything is all right. His voice was serene. Everything is all right again. He sensed something a little motherly in her. But the headache came back. She writhed and twisted and sank to the floor in a corner of the room. It won't do. It won't do. I'm going home, going home. Do you think you can walk that far? And listen to the rain. I'll go home barefoot. I'll crawl home. You don't think that's a little dangerous? If you have to go, I'll take you. The inn was on a hill, and the road was a steep one. Suppose you try loosening your clothes. Lie down for a little while, and you'll feel well enough to go. No, this is the way. I'm used to it. She sat up straight and took a deep breath, but breathing was clearly painful. She felt a little nauseated, she said, and opened the window behind her, but she could not vomit. She seemed to be holding back the urge to fall down writhing on the floor. Now and then she came to herself. I'm going home. I'm going home, she said again and again, and presently It was after 2. Go on to bed. Go on to bed when a person tells you to. But what will you do? Shimamura asked. I'll just sit here like this. When I feel a little better, I'll go home. I'll go home before daylight. She crawled over on her knees and tugged at him. Go on to sleep. Pay no attention to me, I tell you. Shimamura went back to bed. The woman sprawled over the table and took another drink of water. Get up. Get up when a person tells you to. Which do you want me to do? All right, go to sleep. You aren't making much sense, you know. He pulled her into bed after him. Her face was turned halfway, hidden from him, but after a time, she thrust her lips violently toward him. Then, as if in a delirium, she were trying to tell of her pain, she repeated over and over, he did not know how many times, No, no, didn't you say you wanted to be friends? The almost too serious tone of it rather dulled his ardor, and as he saw her wrinkle her forehead in the effort to control herself, he thought of standing by the commitment he had made. But then she said, I won't have any regrets. I'll never have any regrets. But I'm not that sort of woman. It can't last. Didn't you say so yourself? She was still half numb from the liquor. It's not my fault. It's yours. You lost. You're the weak one, not I. She ran on almost in a trance, and she bit at her sleeve as if to fight back against the happiness. She was quiet for a time, apparently drained of feeling. Then, as if the thought came to her from somewhere in her memory, she struck out. You're laughing, aren't you? You're laughing at me. I am not. Deep in your heart, you're laughing at me. Even if you aren't now, you will be later. She was choked with tears. Turning away from him, she buried her face in her hands. But a moment later, she was calm again. Soft and yielding as if she were offering herself up, she was suddenly very intimate, and she began telling him all about herself. She seemed quite to have forgotten the headache. She said not a word about what had just happened. But I've been so busy talking I haven't noticed how late it is. She smiled a little bashfully. She had to leave before daylight, she said. It's still dark, but people here get up early. Time after time she got up to look out the window. They won't be able to see my face yet, and it's raining. No one will be going out to the fields this morning. She seemed reluctant to go even when the lines of the mountain and of the roofs on its slopes were floating out of the rain. Finally, it was time for the hotel maids to be up and about. She retouched her hair and ran, almost fled from the room, brushing aside Shimamura's offer to see her to the door. Someone might catch a glimpse of the two of them together. Shimamura went back to Tokyo that day.